Did you ever stop and think about how black folks really carried their guns during segregation? Not the Hollywood version, not the folklore, but the quiet, hidden, nerve-tight ways you remember seeing with your own eyes. It wasn't about swagger or posing. It was survival, tucked into a world that pretended you weren't allowed to protect yourself. You remember that first method because it was the most common. The pistol tucked deep in the waistband, right behind the hip bone, under a loose shirt. You'd see a man shift his weight just slightly, and you'd know that little adjustment, the tug of the shirt, the half-second glance around, told you everything. The gun felt warm from being pressed against skin all day. It left a faint imprint on the waistband, and you could always hear the soft scrape of metal if he bent forward too fast. The reason for that placement was simple. It had to stay invisible. A black man in the 1940s, 50s, even early 60s couldn't just walk openly armed without inviting trouble. Sheriffs could arrest first, justify later. White store owners could refuse service and call it being uncomfortable. A simple traffic stop could turn into a disaster, so that hip tuck became a lifeline, quick enough to reach, hidden enough to avoid questions. Today you see people wear outside holsters like it's nothing, but back then you'd never risk it. Do you remember who in your neighborhood wore theirs like that? Then there was the pocket carry, the deep heavy sag on one side of the trousers. You could always tell when a man had a revolver sitting in his front pocket because his walk changed. His steps were shorter, careful, like he didn't want the gun to shift too much and print through the fabric. You'd hear little clinks when the cylinder brushed against keys or loose change, and if he sat down, he'd always angle his leg outward, never straight, so the barrel didn't dig painfully into his thigh. That pocket carry had context too. Most black men didn't have holsters at all. Holsters cost money. Holsters were sold in stores that wouldn't serve black customers, especially in small towns, so you used the pocket God gave you. But carrying a whole revolver in your pants wasn't comfortable. It was a commitment. The contrast today is wild. Polymer frames, compact pistols, pocket holsters with anti-print material. Back then, a pocket carry meant cold steel resting against fabric that could tear after too many days of friction. Do you remember seeing that pocket sag on somebody you knew? And then there was the hidden house gun, wrapped in a towel, laid under the seat of the car. Every old sedan or pickup had that space, right below the driver's thighs, where the seat springs were loose and the lining was just hanging enough for a small gun to tuck inside. It smelled like dust, oil, and the faint scent of whatever the car leaked that week. When the car hit bumps, you could hear the dull, padded tap of the gun shifting in the cloth. That wasn't a gun you took everywhere. That was the road gun, the one for nighttime drives, for traveling between counties where a black driver didn't know the temperament of the local law. It was always wrapped because a bare gun rolling around could attract attention during a stop. Cloth muffled sound, cloth disguised shape, cloth gave you time. Today, you can't imagine driving with a weapon hidden like that, not with cameras, center consoles, permit laws, and modern holsters. But back then, you did what you had to. Who in your family kept a road gun? Another method was the boot tuck. Not cowboy boots, not in the segregated South. No, this was the work boot, the heavy leather one with the high ankle. The gun rested against the side of the calf, tucked inside the boot shaft, so only the grip peaked when the pant leg lifted. It was uncomfortable. The muzzle rubbed your socks. Sweat gathered under the leather. Every step created a soft thud as the weight shifted. Men who worked late, janitors, porters, factory workers, were the ones who used this method. If they had to walk home past midnight, they wanted something on them, but wearing it on the waist would draw questions under harsh fluorescent lights when supervisors checked uniforms or when police randomly patted someone down. Down in the boot, it became part of the body, something you could go a whole shift without thinking about until you stepped outside. Can you feel that weight hitting the side of your ankle again? Of course, you remember the women. Black women carried differently, quietly, cleverly, with precision. They kept small pistols in their handbags. Not the large revolvers the men favored, but those little pocket-sized ones with pearl handles or worn bluing from years of rubbing against purse lining. A woman's purse told stories. The zipper sounded softer when it slid open. The bag itself had weight to it, even if it looked dainty. You'd see a handbag placed gently on a church pew, not because of the Bible inside, but because of the steel lying under it. The context was different for them. Women didn't draw suspicion as easily. A purse didn't raise eyebrows, but they also carried because they walked the same streets. faced the same dangers and had even fewer protections. In modern times, you see polymer compacts marketed to women with colors and ergonomic grips. Back then, it was whatever the family owned, often a hand-me-down. Do you remember the sound of your aunt's purse hitting the table heavier than it should have? The method you probably didn't see unless you were paying close attention was the coat carry, not the concealed carry coat people wear today with built-in pockets. This was just a long church coat or a heavy winter jacket. A man would slip the revolver into the inside pocket or between the coat lining and the fabric. You knew because he always kept the coat buttoned, even when it was warm. One side of the coat swung heavier than the other. The coat had a certain stiffness where the barrel pressed the lining outward. This method was mostly for Sundays or evenings out. Black men wanted to look sharp for church, but they also knew the walk from house to pew went through a world where anything could happen, and the coat carry made you feel safe without looking armed. Today, people wear specially designed concealed carry jackets, but nothing about the old coat was designed. Everything was improvised, stitched with necessity. Do you remember that one uncle who always kept his coat on indoors? You also remember how some folks carried their guns in the glove compartment, back when glove compartments were metal, not plastic, and they opened with that loud, metallic clack. You'd ride in a relative's old Ford or Chevy, and when they reached across to open that compartment, you'd see the gun lying right on top of registration papers, a ragged map, and a prayer card. The gun always slid a little when the car turned, making a soft scrape like it was reminding you, I'm still here. The glove box wasn't for quick access, not really, it was for reassurance. A lot of black drivers used it because it felt safe, closed, out of sight, tucked between everyday objects. But the risk was real. If police stopped you and searched the car, you had no time to explain anything. Still, the alternative, driving those long, dark stretches with nothing, felt worse. Today, glove compartments usually hold masks, manuals, or receipts. But think back, whose car do you remember where the glove box always felt heavier than the engine? Another method, especially for farmers and men working rural land, was the truck door pocket carry. Old trucks had deep, wide side pockets inside the doors, shaped like rectangles with hard edges. Sliding a shotgun shell or a pistol into that pocket was quick. You'd hear the thud. Drivers kept the gun angled so the grip poked upward, hidden but reachable. When you rode in the truck, you'd lean your knee against the door and feel that cold steel radiating through the panel. This was more common on back roads, where black folks had to worry about more than just stray animals. White vigilantes patrolled certain areas. Sundown towns were very real. A man traveling early in the morning or late at night didn't take chances. Today, truck door pockets hold water bottles and sunglasses, but back then, they held things meant for survival. Can you still remember resting your arm on that door and knowing exactly what was inside? Then there was the tackle box method. Not many talk about this one, but if you came from a family that fished, you know exactly what I mean. Those old metal or plastic tackle boxes had removable trays and small compartments. Some black men kept a snub-nosed revolver resting under the fishing hooks and sinkers tucked beneath a layer of cloth or newspaper. It looked innocent. Nobody questioned a man carrying a tackle box near a riverbank or creek. The sensory memory is unmistakable. The smell of bait, oil, river water, and metal mingling together. The gun stayed cold inside that box, even on hot days. If someone walked by, you'd hear the casual click of the latch reopening, just to check, just to make sure everything was still there. Today, fishing gear is bought in neat, organized kits, but back then, that tackle box carried more than lures. Do you remember the sound of yours rattling when you walked? School teachers and preachers, the ones who were respected, the ones you thought never touched a gun, had their own method, the satchel or briefcase carry. Those battered leather bags had a distinct smell, old paper, ink, dust, and sometimes faint mildew. A firearm tucked inside added a new scent, gun oil, metal, and the weight that changed the swing of the bag when it hit the hip. They carried because they were pillars of the community, which made them targets. A preacher walking home after evening service needed protection. A teacher staying late too. Grade papers might have to cross a street where police didn't bother responding to calls from black residents. The contrast today is striking. Metal detectors in schools, gun-free zones, societal debates. But back then, people understood one thing: responsibility didn't erase danger. Who in your memory carried a bag heavier than it looked? Of course, the broom closet gun in the house was a staple. It wasn't carried on the body, but it was carried in the rhythm of everyday life. Every black home, from Mississippi to Virginia to Arkansas, had one hidden in a place that looked ordinary but was chosen with precision: behind the broom, under the dustpan, leaning against the wall behind coats. you'd smell pine sol and dust in that closet, and beneath it all, the faint metallic scent of the rifle or shotgun standing quietly in the corner. This was the gun for the unexpected knock at night, for the sound outside the window, for protection during tense moments when men gathered on porches whispering about trouble stirring in town. Today, people install cameras and security systems. Back then, the broom closet was security. Do you remember how you felt whenever that door creaked open just a bit too far? Then there was the rolled blanket method, especially during long trips. Families traveling to other states, sometimes for funerals, sometimes for work, sometimes just to get away from the tension of the South, kept a shotgun wrapped inside a blanket on the backseat floor. If someone glanced into the car, it just looked like bedding or clothes. But if you lifted the roll, you felt the cold, hard outline inside. The blanket trapped the smell, gunpowder, old wood, oil. The fabric got stained sometimes, but every family that used this method had one rule: never unroll it unless absolutely necessary. Today you think of car trunks, lock boxes, or travel cases, but back then, a blanket was a shield. Do you remember the way adults warned you never to sit on that roll? Men who worked in barbershops had their own discreet method, inside the drawer beneath the clippers. If you grew up around a black barbershop, you remember the sound of buzzing clippers, the smell of talc powder, the cigarette haze drifting in from outside, the fan pushing warm air. Beneath all that was a drawer that opened stiffly, revealing scissors, combs, brushes, and a pistol lying flat under a folded towel. Barbers were community hubs. They heard everything. They saw everyone. They stayed late, closing up, and the shop itself had to be protected from break-ins, so that drawer became the safest place, reachable but unseen. Today, shops install cameras and metal gates, but can you still hear that drawer sliding open? Just barely? When the shop felt too quiet, women used hat boxes too, round boxes with bright patterns, ribbons, or faded colors. Inside, instead of a Sunday hat, some kept a small revolver wrapped in fabric. Hat boxes were normal accessories. Nobody questioned them. And because women often traveled in groups or with children, keeping a gun in a hat box felt discreet and safe. You remember the light powdery scent inside those boxes, the lingering perfume, the felt lining, and beneath it the cold metal. Women carried these on trains, buses, and sometimes into workplaces where they felt unsafe. Today you don't see hat boxes much, but back then they were perfect hiding places. Whose hat box in your family wasn't really about hats? Another method that often went unnoticed was the hollowed out Bible, or book used by some older church-going men. Not for daily carry, more for home protection. They'd carve out a rectangular space in the thick pages of an old family Bible, then rest a small pistol inside. The smell of old pages mixed with gun oil was unforgettable. The book stayed on the bedside table, looking innocent. The context was simple: break-ins, racial tensions, night riders. A man needed something close at hand, and showing a gun openly in the home, especially around young children, could create fear. Today this feels extreme, but for them, it was survival wrapped in scripture. Do you remember seeing a Bible that felt heavier than it should have been? And finally, one of the most creative methods, the false bottom bag. Crafty folks, seamstresses, and handymen would sew an extra layer into the bottom of a travel bag or grocery sack. The gun lay flat underneath while normal items, bread, canned goods, clothing, rested on top. You'd never notice unless you lifted the bag and felt that unexpected weight shift. This method came from necessity. A black person walking through the wrong neighborhood with something suspicious could get questioned, but carrying groceries, nobody looked twice. Today, reusable bags are light, flimsy, transparent. Back then, thick brown paper or heavy cloth bags made hiding easy. Do you remember lifting a bag that surprised you with its weight? Each of these methods wasn't just about guns, they were about navigating a world designed to keep black people vulnerable. Every hiding place, every careful movement, every practiced reach was shaped by a century of rules meant to restrict who could defend themselves. And yet, people found ways. Quiet ways, clever ways, ways that kept families safe when nothing else could. You also remember the trunk spare tire well, the circular pit beneath the trunk floor where the spare tire rested. A lot of black families kept a rifle or old shotgun tucked along the curve of that wheel well, hidden under the tire itself. It made the trunk smell like rubber and motor oil, with a faint metallic edge that never went away. Whenever someone changed the tire, the adults would gently lift the rim just enough to check that the gun was still there, and then give you that look that told you to keep keep quiet. This method was practical for long trips. The gun was out of sight, muffled, safe from quick searches unless an officer was determined to tear the whole car apart. Today, spare tire wells hold jumper cables, car jacks, emergency kits. But back then, it was the place where families kept something that might save their lives if the night turned wrong. Do you remember the heavy lift of that tire and how everyone pretended it was just a normal repair? Then came the iron skillet method in certain rural households. You can still picture it, the big cast iron pan hanging on the kitchen wall. But what visitors didn't know was that behind it, tucked into a recess or a cutout space in the wood, was a small pistol wrapped in cloth. The skillet was always heavy, always clattered loudly when removed, and nobody questioned why it never moved from its exact spot. Families used this method because the kitchen was one of the safest, most central rooms in the house. A danger at the front door meant you could reach the gun within seconds. The smell of grease, wood smoke, and old iron masked the firearm's scent. Today, people keep knives or pepper spray in drawers, but in those days, even the kitchen walls had eyes. Do you remember which skillet was never really meant for cooking? You might also remember the rafters. Thin wooden beams in older homes, especially in attics, barns, or back rooms. People would wrap a long gun in cloth and lay it across the rafters where dust gathered in thick layers. When you looked up, all you saw was shadow, but if you knew where to look, you'd see the faint outline of the stock, the barrel resting quietly against the wood. The rafters always smelled like old boards, insulation, and time. This wasn't for everyday danger, it was for emergencies. The hidden gun in the rafters was the last line of defense if violence came to the doorstep. Today, security systems beep and alert. Back then, safety rested in dusty beams above your head. Do you remember climbing up once and realizing that the rafters weren't just storing old memories? There was also the jacket over the chair carry. Inside the house, especially when company was over, a man might place his jacket casually on the back of a kitchen chair, but that jacket had weight. Inside the inner pocket was a revolver that tugged the fabric down on one side. When he reached into that pocket, he'd do it slowly, as if just adjusting something. But you knew better. The jacket always stayed close, always within arm's reach. This method was subtle. It said, I'm home, I'm relaxed, but I'm not careless. In today's world of home safes and biometric locks, it feels almost foreign. But back then, home wasn't always a place of guaranteed safety. Do you remember that one man who kept his jacket on a chair like it was a trusted friend? And then there were the hollowed porch steps. This was especially common in older wooden houses where the steps were wide, thick, and slightly loose. People carved small hidden compartments beneath the step, creating a narrow cavity just big enough for a small firearm. You had to lift the board a certain way, slide, tilt, then pull. Inside, the gun laid flat, wrapped in fabric to keep it from rusting. The porch smelled like rain-soaked wood, dust, and sunlight. And under all that, hidden beneath your very feet was protection. Today, porch steps are sealed, polished, or made of concrete, but back then, they were part of a quiet survival system. Do you remember the sound of that hollow step when you stepped on it? There was also the deep coat pocket method that came with winter months. Those long wool coats had oversized pockets that could swallow an entire hand. And a pistol. A man could stand on a street corner with both hands buried in his pockets, fingers lightly touching the grip just in case. Nobody looked twice. The coat swayed heavy and stiff, collecting the scent of smoke, cold air, and wool fibers. Winter made carrying easier but also more tense. People walked in the early dusk when shadows stretched long and white neighborhoods weren't welcoming after sunset. Today, cold weather. Fashion is more about insulation, but back then, those deep pockets carried more than warmth. Do you remember that slow, careful walk down a snowy sidewalk? You also remember the prayer shawl method used by some older women, the knitted shawl or long wrap folded over the arm. Tucked inside its folds, wrapped so neatly you'd never guess, was a small caliber pistol. Women carried them to night services, revivals, and late community meetings. The shawl smelled like cedar and lavender, mixed with the distinct scent of gun oil that clung to the wool only if you stood very close. This method spoke to a quiet strength. Women protected homes and children, often alone while men worked long hours. They didn't boast about it. They didn't announce it, but they carried because they had to. Today, people talk about empowerment, but back then, empowerment was silent, wrapped in yarn. Do you remember the weight of that shawl on your shoulder? Another carry method sat in plain sight. The toolbox. Mechanics, handymen, and laborers kept a pistol nestled under wrenches and screwdrivers hidden beneath layers of metal tools. The box always smelled like oil and iron. When it opened, the clatter of tools masked any sound the gun made. Nobody questioned a black man carrying a toolbox to work or back home. It was part of life. The toolbox gun was for late-night repairs, long walks after shifts, and the rough neighborhoods around factories. Today, toolboxes are plastic, light, see-through, but those old metal ones kept secrets. Do you remember the sound of that toolbox slamming shut? There was also the sewing basket carry. Seamstresses, grandmothers, and mothers kept small pistols at the bottom of their sewing baskets, under layers of fabric scraps, thread spools, and buttons. The basket smelled like cotton, dye, and sometimes mothballs. When the lid opened, all you saw were bright fabrics, but beneath them rested the cold truth of the world outside. Women carried this basket everywhere, to porches, church basements, sewing circles, even across town. Today, sewing baskets feel nostalgic, harmless, but back then, they carried more than needles. Do you remember sitting beside a sewing basket that felt strangely heavy? And then there was the fireplace corner, the spot where kindling was stacked. A shotgun or rifle would lean upright behind that pile of firewood, perfectly camouflaged. If you walked into the living room, all you noticed was the smell of smoke and the warmth from the hearth. But tucked in that tight corner was the house's true guard. Families kept that gun for night sounds, for knocks after midnight, for the times you didn't know whether to answer the door. Today, fireplaces are decorative, but back then, they guarded the home. Do you remember the sharp smell of burnt wood covering the scent of old steel? Finally, one of the most ingenious methods, the coat hanger. Some men stitched a small holster-like pouch inside the lining of a heavy work coat. When the coat hung on a hook or nail, the gun stayed hidden inside the fold of fabric, invisible to anyone who glanced at it. The coat always seemed a little too heavy on one side, but nothing else gave it away. This was for people who wanted a gun within arm's reach the moment they grabbed their coat to go outside. Life was unpredictable. The world outside was unpredictable. Today, coat designs are simple, but back then, a coat could be protection in more ways than one. Do you remember grabbing a coat and feeling the subtle shift of weight? All these methods, every pocket, every fold, every hidden space, weren't about aggression. They were about survival in a world where black people weren't allowed the luxury of feeling safe. Guns weren't displayed. They weren't bragged about. They were carried with caution, with intention, with an understanding that every day required preparation. Carrying a gun during segregation was a quiet act of courage. It meant knowing the law wasn't on your side. It meant understanding the risks on both ends. Danger if you carried, danger if you didn't. And yet, people found ways to protect themselves and their families. Not loudly, not boldly, but wisely. With a kind of measured, steady resilience that you still feel in your bones. You also remember how some families kept a gun tucked high above the doorway, right on top of the molding where dust gathered in a thin gray line. The firearm rested horizontally, balanced between the frame and the wall. You couldn't see it unless you stepped close and craned your neck upward. That spot held the faint smell of wood polish and old paint, but the metal line across it added a coldness that didn't belong to the room. This was the emergency reach point. If someone forced their way in or there was shouting outside, a man could reach up instinctively, hand brushing past the trim, closing around the grip without hesitation. Today, people mount cameras above their doors, but back then, the Saditak's head molding itself held the house's quiet defense. Do you remember being told, "Don't touch up there"? Another method was the coal shed stash. Houses heated with coal or wood often had small outbuildings or lean-tos filled with black dust and gritty air. A gun wrapped in burlap sat on a high shelf or between stacked buckets. The coal smell, sharp, dry, bitter, covered everything else. No officer or intruder wanted to dig through a coal pile, and no child ventured into that dark corner for fun. The coal shed was for real emergencies, the kind where you couldn't afford to keep the gun inside but needed it close. Today, storage sheds hold lawn tools. Back then, they held the line between danger and survival. Do you remember the crunch of coal under your shoes when you stepped inside? And then there was the pistol in the piano bench. Many black homes had old upright pianos, some gifted, some rescued, some kept for church musicians. The bench opened on a hinge, and inside lay sheet music, hymnals, and sometimes a small handgun wrapped in sheet music from a song nobody played anymore. The smell inside the bench was unforgettable. Old paper, varnish, and faint metal. This method worked because the piano was sacred. No one touched it without permission. Children didn't slam the bench shut. Visitors didn't pry it open. And at night, when danger felt close, a man could sit at the piano, lift the bench silently, and reach for protection. Today, pianos are decorative pieces in living rooms, but back then, they quietly protected the family as faithfully as the music they carried. Can you still hear the creak of that bench opening? The mattress seam was another clever spot. People would rip open the stitching on the side of an old mattress, slide a gun inside the cushioning, then sew it halfway shut with uneven thread. bed. The gun stayed hidden beneath layers of cotton batting and springs, insulated by years of sleep and sweat. The mattress smelled like fabric softener, dust, and time, and beneath that, the cold truth of the world outside. This hiding place wasn't for quick access. It was for last resort protection. If someone broke in searching for valuables, the mattress seemed the least interesting thing in the room. Today, people keep safes under beds, but back then, the bed itself guarded the secret. Do you remember sitting on a mattress that dipped more on one side without knowing why? You might also remember the floorboard. Certain houses had one loose, squeaky board that lifted up easily, revealing a shallow space between the joists. The wood smelled like earth and age. Inside that cavity, a small gun wrapped in cloth stayed hidden for years. Only one or two people in the house even knew which board lifted. This was the ultimate hideaway. You had to kneel, slide your fingers into the crack, and lift with a slow, steady motion. It wasn't fast, wasn't flashy, but nobody, not even a determined intruder, thought to check under the floors. Today, floors are sealed tight, but back then, a house's creaks and gaps carried a purpose. Do you remember the sound that one board made every time someone stepped on it? There was also the dresser bottom method. Dressers back then had drawers you could pull all the way out. Underneath the lowest drawer was a hollow space where dust bunnies collected. Families placed a gun under there, resting on the wood frame. The dresser smelled like cedar, perfume, old socks, and the faint whisper of metal. Kids never thought to check under the drawers. Adults only reached there when danger felt close or when the house seemed too quiet. Today, dresser bottoms are sealed or reinforced, but back then, they hid things meant only for grown-ups. Do you remember helping someone clean out a dresser and wondering why the bottom panel looked scratched? And then came the medicine cabinet decoy. Some older bathrooms had mirrored cabinets with tiny metal hinges and glass shelves. Behind the mouthwash and shaving cream, tucked into the far back corner, sat a small pistol wrapped in tissue or cloth. The cabinet always smelled like menthol, rubbing alcohol, and soap, the sense of everyday life. The gun didn't belong there, but it blended in. Families used this method because danger didn't wait politely in the living room. Sometimes you needed protection close to where you slept, where you bathed, where you lived your private life. Today, medicine cabinets hold skincare and toothbrushes, but back then, they held preparation. Do you remember seeing a cabinet that never seemed to close quite right? There was also the hollow brick trick in certain yards. Some families removed a brick from an outdoor wall or garden border, hollowed out a space behind it, then slid the brick back into place. Inside that cavity, wrapped in oiled cloth, sat a revolver or ammunition. The brick smelled like sun, dirt, and earth, an outdoor scent that hid all traces of metal. This method was used by people who didn't want to keep firearms inside the home, especially if children were curious. It also protected families when night riders or vigilantes prowled through neighborhoods. Today, outdoor hiding spots are more decorative than functional, but back then, the yard itself helped guard the home. Do you remember the one brick that was just slightly loose? Another method you'll remember is the record player cabinet. Those old wooden cabinets with sliding lids or front-facing doors were everywhere in black homes, playing gospel, blues, jazz, Motown. But behind the stack of vinyls, behind the wires and speakers, some families hid a small handgun. The cabinet smelled like warm wood, vinyl sleeves, electronics, and dust. Nobody suspected a record player. Kids loved playing with it, but they never dug deep enough to find what was hidden behind the albums. And during tense nights, an adult could slide that door open softly, quiet as a prayer, to reach for what they needed. Today, sound systems are modern, compact, but back then, music and protection shared the same space. Do you remember the warm hum the cabinet made when it was turned on? Even more resourceful was the curtain rod stash. Thick rods with hollow centers could hold small caliber pistols wrapped tightly in cloth. You'd never guess. The rods smelled like dust and sunlight, and the gun inside never saw the light of day unless something went terribly wrong. This method kept firearms out of sight, out of reach, and out of suspicion. It wasn't for everyday danger, but for the just-in-case moments that every black family prepared for, quietly, silently. Today, curtain rods are flimsy, decorative, but back then, they were stronger, strong enough to hold secrets. Do you remember the rod that seemed heavier than the others? And finally, the traveling coffee thermos method. On long road trips, especially during the Green Book era, black families carried metal thermoses filled with coffee or comfort drinks for the drive, but but some thermoses had false bottoms or removable inserts. Beneath the drinks, beneath the metal layer, rested a small handgun. The thermos smelled like coffee, tin, and, if you knew, gun oil hidden underneath. This method mattered because stopping on the road wasn't always an option. Some areas were hostile. Some towns were dangerous. A family needed something nearby, closer than the trunk, closer than a glove box. Today, travel mugs are plastic, uniform. But back then, thermoses were solid, heavy, reliable. Do you remember taking a sip from one and wondering why it weighed so much? All these methods paint a single truth. Black survival during segregation wasn't loud. It wasn't boastful. It wasn't reckless. It was strategic, ingenious, quiet, and rooted in the unspoken understanding that the world outside didn't care if you made it home safely. Guns weren't symbols of power. They were insurance policies in a society that denied black people full protection under the law. Carrying one wasn't about machismo. It was about making sure the sun rose on the people you love. Every hiding place, every careful motion, every silent precaution came from a long lineage of resilience. And now that you've walked through these memories, these quiet, hidden, half-forgotten survival strategies, let me ask you this. Which one do you remember? Which method did someone in your family use, even if nobody talked about it out loud? If any of these brought back memories, if any made you nod slowly and say, "Yeah, I remember that," then you know what to do. Drop your memory in the comments. Share the one hiding place you'll never forget. Click on one of the cards on your screen to see more videos like this.